Good afternoon. And welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm John Farmer, past chair of the Commonwealth Board of Governors and retired general partner of Goldman Sachs, and your moderator for today's program. It is my pleasure to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, which includes Forbes Magazine, and author of the book, Reviving America: How Repealing Obamacare, Replacing the Tax Code, Reforming the Fed Will Restore Hope and Prosperity. This is it. I've read it. I highly recommend it. It's very interesting. Mr. Forbes writes editorials for each of the Forbes for each issue of Forbes under the heading of Fact and Comment, a widely respected economic prognosticator. He is the only writer to have won the highly prestigious Crystal Owl Award 4 times. The prize was formally given by the U.S. Steel Corporation to the financial journalist whose economic forecast for the coming year proved most accurate. In both 1996 and 2000, Mr. Forbes campaigned vigorously for the Republican nomination for the presidency. Key to his platform were a flat tax, medical savings accounts, a new Social Security system for working Americans, parental choice of schools for their children, term limits, and a strong national defense. Steve continues to energetically promote this agenda. His remarks today are entitled, "The Economy, Stocks, Taxes, and Health Care, What's Next?" It's my pleasure to welcome back to the Commonwealth Club, Steve Forbes. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, John, for those very kind remarks, and thank all of you for coming here today. As John indicated, I'm talking about the economy right now. And by the way, let me say something on stocks, since that's part of the title, which is the reason probably most of you came. Is he going to give me something to get me rich? Okay, get that out of the way. By the way, I should preface my remarks on stocks by citing a favorite saying of my grandfather, who founded our company 100 years ago, actually from September 1917. He was an immigrant to this country from Scotland, grade school education, one of 10 children. But like many who came to this country, had dreams and ambitions and an opportunity to realize them. And when he started Forbes magazine, people would ask him, what's going to happen to the economy? Where interest rates going? Which stock should you buy? My grandfather, being an honest individual, would invariably answer. He would say, you make more money selling the advice than following it. So, full disclosure here. Yeah, if I was good, I'd be on the Forbes 400 list, but I haven't quite joined Warren Buffett yet. But just a few things on stocks, and then we'll get more into it as we discuss the economy and some of the issues surrounding it, is that to realize that emotions are your enemy. Everyone is a disciplined long-term investor until the market goes down. Then it is it too late to get out? Now, with high tech booming, imagine Amazon going up 13% in one day. Phenomenal. People are saying, is it too late to get in? So being disciplined in stocks is like saying, when you want to lose weight, eat less. Yes, very true, but hard to do. So recognize that you're always going to give in to temptation. So what I've always recommended, for what it's worth, is you divide your investing into 2 parts, one for your retirement and the other for everything else. On the retirement side, don't try to beat Warren Buffett. Don't try to hit home runs. Don't listen to your brother-in-law at a cocktail party. Just go for something simple, few index funds, low fees, put your money in quarterly, annually, whatever schedule you're on, and just let it ride. Don't even look at it except when you have to. And that way, over your lifetime, you'll do just fine. The inner Warren Buffett in you should then apply to the rest of your portfolio. And some of you may have a knack for it. You may have a business. All your conditions are different, so focus on that part. But on the investment side, don't fool around with it. Just put it aside and let it ride. This country always comes back after problems, especially when things look bad. One of the reasons why this stock market has lasted so long, this boom, is because people never believed it was for real. And as long as people are worried that the world is coming to an end, even though no meteors are sighted, the fact of the matter is that that kind of worry is a good sign. When people say, by golly, this is for real, that's when you should start to get a little worried. So in essence is, if you feel good, don't. If you feel bad, do it in terms of investing. Okay, 101. All right, now let's get to the economy. The economy is doing better now. Confidence index came out today, which is soaring up, highest in 17 years. The economy is moving ahead. It had been going about 20, 25 miles an hour. Say you're on a superhighway, now we've got it up to 35, 45, but still not where it should be. We should be going a lot faster. So let me get to the couple of the big things that are standing in the way of the economy, and that is some of the big issues. We have big things this week. Tomorrow, the House Republicans unveil their tax plan. I'm not holding my breath on that one for reasons I'll discuss in a moment. Right now, from what I've learned, instead of an A, I'd give it a C+. Since we're in an era of great inflation, I can't flunk the thing, but so far I'm not impressed with what I've heard. But we'll discuss that in a moment. Health care, and also this week, on Thursday, the president has indicated he'll name the successor to Janet Yellen as head of the Federal Reserve. So a lot of things are happening. Okay, on the tax side. Why in the world, on something so simple, especially Republicans are supposed to be good at tax cuts, why in the world are we here now about to go November 1st before they even unveil what they have in mind in terms of any detail? There have been a lot of outlines, but not a lot of specifics. What in the world is going on here? Why didn't they just do it? Like Ronald Reagan did in the early 80s, like John Kennedy proposed and eventually enacted in the 1960s. What in the world is the matter with these people? First of all, in ancient times, back in the old days, when people wanted to know what was going to happen in the future, they'd go to things like the Delphic Oracle, if you were in Greece. A lot of smoke and hocus pocus, but it was a great show, and the Delphic Oracle made sure things were said that could be interpreted both ways. Great way to make a living. Would have been a great talking head today. And in Rome, perhaps because they had a Las Vegas gene, they had Vestal virgins dancing around while they did this stuff. But to show the lack of imagination in Washington today, what they worship, at least on the Republican side, is a thing called the Congressional Budget Office, which purports to do economic modeling about what the future holds. Well, they can no more predict the future than anyone else. If they could predict the future, they wouldn't be working for the CBO. They'd be out buying lottery tickets or speculating in commodities, getting on the Forbes 400 list. But they pretend they do. And models, as you know, economic models have a lot of assumptions. The CBO assumption is that tax cuts don't do much good for the economy, even though experience shows quite the opposite. So no matter what you do, it's always going to be, as they say, a bad score. Nonetheless, so it's as you know about modeling, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. But nonetheless, the Republicans take these numbers very seriously, even though they're really not fake numbers. The numbers are real enough, but they don't reflect anything resembling reality. You'll learn more about the future reading chicken entrails. I shouldn't say that because Peter will get mad, but reading your daily horoscope will give you a better gauge of your future than the CBO. But nonetheless, the Republicans are now going through pretzel-like maneuvers to try to get what they call revenue neutrality, net revenue neutrality. In other words, they're going to cut taxes, but it's not going to cost any money. Okay. All right. But the fact of the matter is, the feeling they have to appease the CBO gods has gotten them to do some pretty crazy stuff. First of all, that leads to the question, why did they lead off with health care? New administration comes in, they pounded the new president, you got to lead with health care rather than tax cuts. The reason they want to lead with health care is in the CBO world they live in, that would save, they thought, $1.1 trillion over 10 years, which would give more money for tax cuts. Now, ponder how stupid that messaging is. First of all, when people hear you're going to cut money for health care, they initially assume you're taking something away. You can show that it isn't, but that's the initial assumption and public perception. So you're taking money away from health care to do what? Cut corporate taxes. Boy, that's a great message. Not. But that's what they led with. Instead of leading with, boy, these health care changes are going to make it better for you, give you more control, the things that people are worried about, they lead with this thing, we'll save $1.1 trillion. Oh, my God. So that's why they led with health care, which they discovered health care is complicated. They're still discovering that. So, okay, that's why they didn't lead with a simple tax cut. But the need to appease the CBO gods also led them to produce crazy proposals, like the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, proposed about a year ago a thing called the Border Adjustment Tax, which was a 20% national sales tax on imports. Well, guess what that would do? That would slam the very people who live from paycheck to paycheck. Typical vehicle would go up $2,500. They forgot that a lot of parts, even though a car may be manufactured in the U.S., there are a lot of parts from overseas. Your handhelds, your Apple, whatever you have, parts from all over the world. So 20% sales tax is going to boost the price of it and hurt the people with the least, hurt the most with the least. And so when asked why he was proposing this, one of the reasons Ryan said, well, we need the money for tax cuts. Again, why are you raising a tax to cut a tax? Just cut the taxes, Paul. But anyway, so they finally dropped this crazy 20% sales tax. But now they're talking about reducing IRA contributions, a fourth tax bracket, phasing in corporate tax cuts, which just creates uncertainty. Just do the simple tax cuts. John Kennedy did it in the early 60s. Ronald Reagan did it in the 80s. Forget about cleaning up the tax code. It is too late, guys. You dawdled too long. Just do across-the-board tax cut. And we want to clean the code. I'm going to discuss in a moment how you do it, but you're not going to do it this time. It's too late for that. So forget about fooling around with mortgage deductions. Forget about state and local tax deductions. It's too late. Just go for a straight tax cut and be done with it and get the economy moving. Your task is not revenue neutrality or reform. That's another thing. Don't talk about tax reform. Talk about tax cuts. People understand cuts. Tax reform, what are you talking about? And so just go for a straight tax cut, start to get the economy from 35 miles an hour to 50, 60 miles an hour, and you'll have an environment in which you can do other good things in the future. Just start with something simple. So on the business side, go for a 15% business tax. Ireland has 12.5%. England is bringing theirs down to 15, so other countries are moving that way. Let's do it and to go from the worst in the world to one of the best in the world. Just do it. And in terms of taxing profits overseas, stop it. Most other countries don't do it, so we get some of these hundreds of billions coming back in the U.S., investing in the U.S., good stuff. Pass-throughs, a lot of you have businesses that are partnerships or LLCs or S-corps. Take it down to 20 or 25% and just be done with it. And on the personal side, they say they're going to double the standard deduction, which tells people nothing. Instead, talk about messaging. They should say your first $24,000, $25,000 of federal income tax will be free of federal income tax. For $25,000 of income, free of federal income tax. People get that. But no, they want to make it complicated. So do that, double that, and then do an across-the-board rate cut, like Reagan or Kennedy did. Pick 15, 20%, just cut the rates across the board. Now, a lot of people don't pay income tax in this country, so what do you do about them? Do what we did with President Obama several years ago. It was a bipartisan proposal. They took, for a couple of years, 2 points off of your Social Security tax. They made up for the revenue from general revenue, so you didn't take money out of the trust fund. But what they did was, so your first 2 points of tax, employee tax, you didn't have to pay it anymore. Instead of doing 2 points, how about doing 4 points? So somebody making as little as $10,000 or $15,000 a year, part-time or whatever. $500, $600 raise in pay. So everyone gets a pay raise. Even if you don't pay federal income tax, you all pay the payroll taxes. And by the way, they think in Washington, those are not real taxes, those are contributions. No, they are a tax. It comes out of your pay, and they spend it right away. So let's get over that illusion. And so do it that way. So do the Social Security thing so everyone gets a cut. Do the rates across the board because you want consumption and you want investment. The way you get a higher standard of living is when you have more investment. Now, we're starting to get more investment now after a long drought. So you want to get more investment. You want to get more small businesses created. That's how you get job creation, innovation for the future. So do it across the board. As I mentioned, Kennedy did it, Reagan did it, and capital gains. You want more risk-taking, so cut the capital gains tax. The nice thing about that, those who call themselves deficit hawks, which really means deficit brains, because they don't realize you need a booming economy to deal with budget deficits. You know, after the Kennedy cuts in the 60s, we got, even though Lyndon Johnson spent zillions of dollars on what he called the Great Society, by the end of the 60s, we had a balanced budget. Then after the build-up, Reagan cut taxes. We had a booming economy. We spent a lot of money on defense, won the Cold War. Defense spending was cut in the 90s. We had surpluses in the late 90s. So it's only when you have a booming economy that you're going to balance the books. So you need a booming economy. So these people who say, oh, we can't cut taxes because we might increase the deficit, I guarantee if you have a stagnant economy, you're going to get deficits as people are going to say, what do? We've got to spend more to rev up the economy, so let's go for growth. And so in terms of other things they should do, capital gains, get rid of the alternative minimum tax, death tax, and make it retroactive. Make it retroactive January 1st this year. Why? Because that way, immediately the thing takes effect immediately, and next spring, when things start to get better and weather, you get a nice refund. Good for psychology, good for the country. And this thing is very important. This thing is very important. If you don't get a booming economy, politics goes south. We saw that in the 30s. We saw that in the 70s. Politics is not good when people feel there's no hope, when people feel, even though we have low unemployment, we have huge underemployment. People feel they're not getting the kind of raises they should have. So even though things are getting better, it's not what it should be. So let's get that right. So in terms of the tax changes, too late for the kind of reform they want, but you got to get the boom. Now, ultimately, I hope in a couple of years, they'll do what 40 other countries and jurisdictions have done, that is go for a flat tax. What that does is take the current federal income tax code, just to put that in quick perspective. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address defined the character of the American nation as all of 273 words. Constitution, all the amendments, 7,300 words. The Bible took centuries to put together, 773,000 words. The federal income tax and all the attendant rules and regulations, 10 million words and rising. And nobody knows what's in it. Nobody. The IRS doesn't know. You call their hotline. If they didn't answer it, fourth or third of the time they give you the wrong answer. They don't know what's in it. Several years ago, Money Magazine did a survey. They took a hypothetical family's finances, gave the numbers to 46 different tax preparers, and you know what they got back? 46 different returns, 46 different estimates of what the family owed. Thousands of dollars. This is from people who make their living at the thing. If they can't get it, no one can. And those who say, well, I've got good software. No. Depending on your circumstance, different software packages will give you different calculations of what you owe the government. They don't really get it. So why not just throw the whole thing out, start over, simple thing. And it's ultimately, then we'll get to healthcare, a moral issue. A moral issue. Why is it a moral issue? Because go back 20 years. The IRS estimates that we spend 6 billion hours a year filling out tax forms. Experts estimate that we spend $200 to $300 billion a year complying with this monstrosity, this corrupt, complex monstrosity. Half the lobbying in Washington revolves around the tax code. 200 to 300 billion. So go back 20 years. Now imagine if all those tens of billions of hours, literally trillions of dollars, all that immense brain power, instead of going to this crazy code, had instead gone to creating new products and new services, new medical devices, new cures for diseases, how much better off we'd all be. What economists call the opportunity cost has been enormous. So the quicker we just throw this thing out and start over, the better. Literally, you could do it on a single sheet of paper, a few keystrokes, and you're done with it. And then you can focus your mind on good things, productive things. Okay, healthcare. All right, why do we have a healthcare crisis in this country? And it's not, people say, well, people like me are getting older, we want more health care, and therefore prices go up and we have an affordability problem. But step back for a moment and ask a basic question. Why is demand for health care considered a crisis, whereas demand for anything else in this economy is seen as a great opportunity? People want more apps. A lot of writers around here be glad to help you out. People want more vehicles. Detroit and other manufacturers glad to come to your assistance. Anything else it's seen as a great opportunity for entrepreneurs. Oh, people want more of something? Boy, rev up and do it. Why is healthcare different? Ultimately, the answer is we don't have real free markets in healthcare. Think of it, it's all third party. It's not you and the doctor, it's third party. Hospitals, for example, no one designed this system. It grew up, so don't point fingers, villain here, villain there. It grew up out of decisions made in World War II, after World War II, so moving forward, it's not going to do any good pointing fingers. It's how we get this thing fixed in a productive way. So in terms of a hospital, for example, they know their revenues depend on how well they negotiate with insurance companies, with large employers, with the government, not on how they satisfy you. And so the proof of it is where the patient lies in this chain, is the lousiest motel in America wouldn't dare put you in a room with another guest, a sick guest, with a curtain in between. It's done routinely at hospitals. And if you get a private room, oh my God, I'm so privileged. Get a private, don't have people wheezing on me. Crazy. Or the robes they give at these places sometimes, you put it backwards, forwards, over your head. I mean, it looks like the Salvation Army washed them 10,000 times before it gets to you. And then when we go to the hospital, even though we've got fantastic health care in this country, the overall quality is superb, and I've been a beneficiary of it. But you sometimes wonder, do the specialists talk to one another? Who's looking out for me? Who's my advocate? And oftentimes you feel you got to take a relative or a friend to look in and make sure everything is all right. So the thing is, no one's really happy about it. So in terms of a normal market, if you go for something other than an emergency, you want to know what the price is. In healthcare, it's the opposite. Don't worry about it. Insurance will cover it. Insurance will cover it nominally, but you ultimately pay for it. A study was done several years ago. If you add up over your lifetime what you actually spend on health care, not just through co-pays and deductibles and co-insurance pays and things like that, but add up what you pay in taxes to finance Medicaid on the local level, taxes to finance Medicaid on the federal level, taxes you pay for Medicare, and the pay that you lost because when somebody pays you a salary, they have to pay for your money and pay for your health insurance. That's money that could have gone to you and doesn't go to you. You add all that up, and we don't even realize it. Over a lifetime, you've paid, without you knowing it, $1.9 million. And you don't even know it. And so, and talk about prices. Just one little story. About a little over a year ago, I went to New Hampshire, visited an entrepreneur who was interested in this stuff, and he told a story about how he had a heart condition, and so he went to a cardiologist. The cardiologist said, among other things, you need a nuclear stress test. And they put something uranium, something in your blood, see how the blood, whatever. Anyway, and by the way, nuclear, this is just an aside, and I shouldn't do this, John, but nuclear, social scientists, I don't understand why they call families nuclear families. I mean, maybe with the mother-in-law you call it nuclear, but I just don't understand how they come up with nuclear families. I just don't. But anyway, so nuclear stress test. So in all innocence, this guy asked, what does it cost? Doc said, I have no idea. Insurance will cover it. So this guy, being an entrepreneur and therefore not taking things as they are, got a group together and they did a survey. They went to some 25 clinics and hospitals. This was in the New England region. And after painstaking research, got the numbers. And that this test is done the same everywhere. It's not as if one does it differently from another. So it's pretty generic, the test. The prices range from $1,450 to $7,300. Same test. You'll see this in less dramatic ways in MRIs and everything else. So my friend goes back to the cardiologist, gives him the prices and says, I'll take the $1,600 variety. It's closer. And the doc says, what? He said, this costs more than $1,400? I had no idea. True story. So the doc gets up, goes off and does some calculations and says, given your particular condition, there's less than a 2% chance this will actually tell us something useful. Why don't we just drop it? True story. So So the key thing is, the whole key thing on this healthcare debate, and I think it's going to happen for a variety of reasons, how do we move ahead where the patient is more in charge, where you're not told to be passive, where you don't get situations where 3 years later you're getting a bill. What was this for? It's hieroglyphics anyway, I can't read it. So a few basic reforms that can get us where patients have more control and where we get what we get in other markets, where you get more for less, where you get real productivity. And people say, well, how can you do it in healthcare? It's so basic. Well, food is more basic than healthcare or medical care. Without food, it's over. But the government doesn't run the farms. In Russia and China, they tried that a few decades ago. Didn't work out very well. They tried it again. We'd have no more obesity. We'd all be starving. So even though government is involved in agriculture, in fact, agriculture here and other places produce the food. Some companies will process the food. Sometimes farmers bring it to farmers' markets. Everyone sells the food, and people have problems. You have everything from food banks to food stamps to deal with it. Why can't we do the same thing in healthcare? Unleash entrepreneurship. There's a lot already, but a lot more waiting in the wings. And have effective safety nets instead of the hodgepodge system we have today. So if something bad happens to you, you will get the care. Right now, if you have a good company plan, but the company drops the plan, you're stuck. If your house burns down, the insurance company has to cover it, whether it takes 2 years to rebuild the house or not. It covers it until it's dealt with. In so-called health insurance, that's not the case. If they drop the policy, boom, out of luck. So they got to change the whole thing. So how do we get to more patient control? One is nationwide shopping for health insurance. Right now, if you live in California, you want to buy a policy that sounds good in the state of Utah, can't do it. You can buy a house in Utah, shoes in Utah, can't buy the insurance. Have nationwide shopping, interstate commerce clause. Equal tax treatment. If you're an individual and you go on the market, you pay with after-tax dollars, whereas if you're an employer, you don't, self-employed, you don't. So let's equalize the tax treatment. Transparency. Let's have hospitals and clinics post prices for everything so you can see it in advance. And so you know what the nuclear stress test costs. And people will say, well, they have different prices for different insurers. Okay, put that online. And by the way, if Harbinger of the Future is a hospital called the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, founded by several neurosurgeons, anesthesiologists several years ago, it's about 10 years ago. And they did something unusual. They don't take insurance. It's all cash, all credit card. Cut out the whole bureaucracy. And remarkably, their prices are low, quality is good, and the prices are so low that the state of Oklahoma is now pushing its own state employees to get many kinds of surgeries done at this hospital because it's so much cheaper than the traditional ones, just cutting out that bureaucracy. And so you end up saving, even though you don't have the so-called insurance with the $10,000 deductible. And so you're going to see more of that. Another thing to require, and this is a little grim, but how about requiring hospitals to post each month how many patients die of infections received after they're admitted to the hospital? Now we know when you go into a hospital because you're ill or an accident, you know you're more susceptible, so we get that. But of the 90-some-odd thousand people who die each year from infections in the hospital, experts estimate at least 80% could be prevented. 80%. So let's have that kind of openness, transparency. You should have more choice in the kind of policy you want. I don't need pregnancy services. And how about getting rid of what they call CONs, C-O-Ns, called certificates of need. In many states, if you want to put in a new facility, you want to expand an existing facility, you have to get permission to do it. Now, if somebody wants to set up a Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts nearby, you don't have to get a certificate of need. You do it and see what people prefer. So why not in healthcare? Open it up so the incumbents don't keep the new people out, keep the competition out. Not right. So in terms of basic reforms, if we follow the food example, I think we can make a lot of progress where patients have more control. And you're going to see rise up more things like the hospital in Oklahoma, Surgery Center in Oklahoma. You're already starting to see it. We have a lot of places, these acute care centers where you go in, unless it's an emergency, where they'll send you to the emergency room or something bad. You go in, you have a cold or flu, and they give you what you need, and you're out. You're going to see more and more of that. where patients have more and more control. That's the key. And so in terms of also healthcare, if they ever get something done, I hope they give states more flexibility on Medicaid. Medicaid, sadly, we don't have time to go through it here today, is the most expensive and inefficient healthcare insurance program in the Western world. They spend more and the outcomes are not good. So let's get some innovation there. For example, in Rhode Island, a few years ago, they got what they call a waiver instead of one size fits all, which one of the things they did was more home care. Well, we know oftentimes you'll do better getting care at home than in some institution. And it saved money, but it also had better outcomes. So let's find out what works best instead of this one size fits all. So the key thing is getting more patient control, more flexibility, and we'll start to see miracles happen there that we see everywhere else when people who are creative come up with ideas that go against the incumbents, but do end up doing things better. Now, quick thing, because it's going to come on Thursday, monetary policy. I've told some of you before, there's no more less exciting topic in the world than the Federal Reserve, monetary policy, and all that kind of thing, open market operations, fall asleep. So let me just once again give you a travel tip for what I'm going to do for you for the next 2 minutes. And that is, if you ever find yourself in an airplane, in coach, middle seat, on the runway, watching your life pass away, you want a little bit of elbow room with your seatmates, start talking to them about monetary policy. Now, hopefully they won't drag you off the plane, but you will have that elbow room. But the thing is, if you don't get the money right, nothing else is going to work. Why? Or work well. Why? Because how do we make progress? We do it by interacting with each other, buying and selling with each other. So I don't have to make my food and clothes each day. Others will do it for me. I can focus on what I'm best at, find out what I have a knack for. And so money makes that easier. In the old days, they had barter, which was very inefficient. Imagine trying to deposit a cow into an ATM today. Just is not going to, pulling out a car or something, not going to work very well. Not going to work. And so you want something, and money in and of itself, two basic things. Money is not wealth. Money measures value, the way a scale measures weight, or a clock measures time, or a ruler measures space. That's the key thing money does, is measure value, so you can determine. And it also is like, the other big thing to keep in mind, it's like a claim check. Sometimes you go to a restaurant or something, you put your coat in or bag or whatever. What do you get in return? Piece of plastic or piece of paper. Worthless in and of itself, but a claim on a real product. When you buy a ticket to an event, you might get a piece of paper or an ellipsis on your handheld. Worthless in and of itself, but a claim on a real service. That's what money is. And that's why it's based on trust, taking these worthless tokens, worthless pieces of paper, worthless ellipses, but you get something real in return for it. And so that's how we are able to do all the billions of transactions. The key thing is to keep it stable in value. This is where I wish the Federal Reserve would get over its illusion that it can control the economy by controlling interest rates. Interest rates are a price. It's the price you pay for borrowing money, renting the money, so to speak. If they manipulate prices, they end up messing up the credit markets. And that plus extensive regulation is one reason why we haven't had small business creation the way we should have in the last decade. Head of a large bank estimated the other day that because of massive regulation, between $1.5 and $2 trillion of loans that normally would be made in this expansion weren't made because of the paperwork involved, the complexity involved. And if you get a mortgage, you have to go through zillions of pieces of paper, something that would have been more routine. And the sad thing is that all the reforms they've done since 2008, 98% of them have been in effect before 2008, we still would have had the crisis. The crisis came because they undermined the integrity of the dollar. When that happens, you get false commodity booms, false housing booms, you get a crash afterwards. We did it in the 70s, we did it again in the early part of this century. So short term, the Fed should do more deregulation. I think the fellow who's likely to be appointed on Thursday, a fellow named Powell, is in favor of a less heavy hand by the Fed. That'll be good. I'm not sure he understands money yet. I'm sending him a copy of my book, free. But at least he gets the fact that if we let the credit markets operate again will be good for the economy. Reduce the size of their bloated portfolio so the money goes back into the financial community, financial economy, so we get more capital being put to work. Basic things like that. Now, people say, in terms of taxes in closing, if they do what you're recommending, we'll have a big deficit. No, over 10 years, which is how they measure these things, the revenue always grows when you have a booming economy. Remember what I said about the late 60s? Remember what I said about the late 90s? When you have a booming economy, the revenue comes in because we're all doing more. So in closing, a lot of problems. Hopefully, I think the Republicans will pass a tax bill. Why? Because of the instinct of self-preservation. I hope it's a good one. They're suddenly realizing there's an election next year, and they've suddenly dawned on them that they don't get this economy moving. A lot of them are going to be pursuing new opportunities after the elections, and not many of them want to become Uber drivers. They'd rather stay ensconced in Washington. Samuel Johnson, great literary figure over 200 years ago, said, "The prospect of a hanging focuses your mind wonderfully." The prospect of a political hanging is going to focus the GOP's mind wonderfully to get something done. I just hope it is a good thing to get done, and then we'll all be happier a year from now. Thank you very much.
Our thanks to Steve, chairman and editor of Forbes Media, as well as author of the book, Reviving America. A lot of what he covered is in here, but there's a lot more in addition to that. I highly recommend that you all buy the book.
If you do, we'll get 2% off for cash.
It's time now for our audience questions, and we have a number of good questions, so we will begin. Steve, the first, given that we have broken public institutions, such as public pension funds that are way underfunded, what would be your solution to addressing these?
Well, first of all, on the pension funds, they've got to put in the states and local level that all new workers go on the equivalents of 401ks. So you don't get the situation that you've always had in the past where they make outlandish promises to win an election and then don't bother to worry about the funding. In the future, that would mean if you're going to make a promise, if you're a politician, you make a promise, you have to put up the money now to start funding these things. And so they can't get away with, 20 years, 30 years down the road, somebody else's problem, I'll be gone. But meantime, I get to win in the election making these outlandish promises. So start with a 401k. Then depending on the state's situation, you can, this is one reason why the Fed's got to stop manipulating interest rates. One reason why these funds, pension funds, even in the private sector, are so underwater is that interest rates are so low. They're so low. And so if you have a low assumptions, that's why they have to artificially raise them by a decree, congressional decree, because if you have a low assumption, then every fund is grossly underfunded. So get a more normal interest rate environment, get a more booming economy, and then some states you may have to make a bargain, whether it's a kind of an annuity thing, buyout, or you wait 5 years or something where they may have to do it. I think in many states, if you get a good environment, you stop bringing in people into the system with a 401k, we can buy our way out of it. Prosperity will cover most of us. The big thing, though, is on the healthcare side. And if you get more patient-oriented healthcare, these unfunded liabilities come crashing down. And that's why you've got to get more patient control. Two quick areas, John, in terms of that, where you've already seen it work, is LASIK surgery for the eyes. For some reason, there's no in-between you and the person doing the surgery. And so it costs about half to two-thirds today in real terms of what it did 12 years ago, and a better result. Why? Because providers then have every incentive to make it more affordable to you and better for you. Cosmetic surgery, none of you need it. It's called pandering, but I tried it in politics, didn't work, which is why I'm here today. But anyway, it's grown about 7 or 8-fold in the last quarter century. Huge technological advances, but you haven't had the inflation that you've had the rest of medical care. Why? Because unless it's a result of accident or disease, it's between you and the provider. And so you scope it out like anything else. You want a procedure done. What do? If you have friends who can keep their mouth shut, you might ask them for advice and things like that. So what you have to do is when you start getting more of this patient orientation, like we have in food, the liabilities come down, and therefore that huge liability on the healthcare side, we've promised them everything forever, then it becomes more manageable. The state of Indiana, for example, has gone for what they call health savings accounts. A lot of Americans have them too, where you get cash at our own company. We give people $2,500 money in their health savings account. We have a high deductible, but most of it's covered by the $2,500, which means that if you get a good price on a prescription, that's money in your pocket, not mine, not the insurance company, not the government, you. You will get value. Okay, this sounds like a good for me. And so you got to get more patient control. And it doesn't mean we have to be doctors any more than you have to be technologists to operate a handheld. You know, if you'd said 30 years ago, gee, Grandma can operate a supercomputer. You can say she can barely drive a car, and I can say Grandma because I'm over 70, so I, in that space now. And you'd have been called crazy. But now we think nothing with a handheld, which is a supercomputer, would have occupied a room this size a generation ago. Now it's a handheld, and anyone can do it. So the information can come. It's just a better system where you don't feel you're lost, and you're going to get a lot more choices. So you don't feel the system has engulfed you, and you're just hoping it for a good result.
Thank you. This is a very interesting question. I like to listen to the radio. Would you consider starting a radio broadcast network like Bloomberg?
If you pay for it, sure. But the thing about radio is now with podcasting, with the technology, a lot of people can go on radio, and you go on what we used to call radio now with your desktop or whatever. You can call. Talks about music. Croatia, all around the world. You can find musicians and bands and all around the world. I mean, amazing variety of stuff out there. Trying to break through where you can make a living at it, quite another thing. But yes, if somebody comes up where I can just yap off and get a royalty, may not be a bad idea.
Whoever submitted that question, think about that. Could you talk a bit about virtual currencies such as Bitcoin that we read about, and how that plays into your thoughts about the Federal Reserve and the gold standard that you mentioned in your book?
Well, Bitcoin and these other what they call cryptocurrencies, I'm not sure I'd have picked the word crypto because I'm old enough to remember Superman and Kryptonite, so I'm not sure that was a great name. But anyway, that's what they call them, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. A couple of things. One, it was created as a high-tech cry for help. Several years ago, people didn't trust currencies. They wanted to keep their privacy, so they came up with things like Bitcoin that are almost impossible to hack, and there's a limited supply, and so they want it as an alternative currency. Problem with Bitcoin is, as you've known from recent headlines, is it does not have a stable value. If currency does not have a stable value, it's not a real currency, any more than a scale that changes each day, even if your weight stays the same, is not a useful scale. So you take Bitcoin. 1 week you could have steaks and filet, the next week dog food because of the volatility. So they've got to find out a way to make these things stable before you can actually use them for salaries, before you'd actually use them for contracts for long-term investing or building something. They got to do that. Now, the interesting thing is the technology, what they call blockchains. And if anyone can come up with an explanation of a blockchain that can be fitted in a blog, let me know. I haven't found it yet. But anyway, this very sophisticated technology is such that right now we don't realize how expensive and complicated the payment system is here in this country and around the world, where you think you swipe your card and now you put in the chip, which is supposed to be in advance. You know, some of these machines now you put your card in with the chip on it. Takes 5 hours to read, but hey, that's supposed to be high tech. And how expensive that payment system is. What the promise of what you see with blockchains and Bitcoin is that whole infrastructure could be obliterated or largely obliterated in the next generation. And get a little thing about the future, look at, of all places, you'd never guess it, Kenya is far ahead of any other country in the world in using digital currencies because they just didn't trust. They still have their money there called the shilling. But a lot of the transactions are done digitally, way advanced. And by the way, if you want to get worried about China, in this country, digital payments, real digital payments, are about 120 billion a year. In China, it's 9 trillion. They're way ahead of us. So, yeah, we got a lot of work to do on the tech side. But it's the tech side, even more than the money side, that I think you should keep your eye on in terms of drastically changing the kind of payment system that we have today.
Thank you. This is an interesting question, which does not quite go along with what you said up here about taxes. How about a progressive consumption tax or value-added tax instead of income tax?
Well, first, if you're going to put in a new tax, you better get rid of an existing one. So if you want a VAT to replace, say, the federal income tax, and there have been proposals, not a value-added tax is a super sales tax. Right, a sales tax just applies to what you buy at the store, at the end product. A VAT applies the sales tax on every stage of the production, which is why politicians love it, because by the time it gets to you in the store, it's hidden in the price. So therefore, when they raise it, it's not as if you raise the sales tax from 8 to 10%. It's suddenly the price goes up and you blame the merchant, the greedy merchant, or the greedy manufacturer or whatever. And so the Europeans love the VAT. I think the French were the first to do it since they hate to pay taxes there. It's very hard to avoid. And they all have the VAT. Some countries have a variation of it. Canada has what they call the general services tax, which is more like a traditional sales tax. But anyway, if you put that on, then in this country, then you better get rid of the income tax. And the only way you get rid of the income tax is repealing the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which allows Washington to impose an income tax. The Supreme Court ruled back in 1895, the way the Constitution was written, you could not do a tax like that. And so that's why they had to put in an amendment, get that amendment passed to enact the income tax, which they did finally 18 years later, 1913. And so if you don't get rid of that, I guarantee you, you'll get what most states have in this country, which is both a state income tax and a sales tax, or most countries have, both an income tax and a consumption tax. And if you have both, they are real deadweights on the economy. Not one or the other, but if you have both, unless you keep them low, like Singapore does and some others, it is a real deadweight. You look at Europe. Even after Europe recovered from the devastation of World War II in the 50s, remarkable recovery in Europe and Japan, quickly recovered from the devastation of the war, they had growth rates that were equal or better than those of the U.S. Then in the 70s, they all put in the VAT, and suddenly you saw the U.S. grow faster than Europe, to the point, even though the U.S. has the largest developed economy in the world, you'd think that that means it would be harder to get growth because you're so big, such a big base, you're not catching up. But the European economies, we were growing until 10 years ago, we were growing an average of 3.5% a year. They were growing at barely 2%. And I think one of the villains was the VAT. It's a great money machine, but it's a dead weight on the economy. So one or the other, because you have both, it's not good. And even a state like this, where you have pockets of fantastic prosperity, like the Valley, you have also parts of the state that are not doing very well. And Art Laffer and Steve Moore have done a book called The Wealth of States, taken off of Smith's Wealth of Nations. But anyway, they've done extensive research on states' tax systems. They found over time, because everyone's going to have ups and downs, over time, the states that have systems that are getting lighter or have the best tax systems on the state level do better than those with the heavy tax systems, which is why the state of Connecticut, once the most prosperous state in the Union, put in a state income tax, which goes up and up, and now they're losing companies, losing people, huge fiscal crisis. My home state of New Jersey used to be one of the most prosperous states in the country. When times were good, we did better. When times were bad, we'd be less hurt and recover more quickly. We now have one of the worst state income taxes in the country, and now we're lagging the nation. We also have the worst property taxes in the country. And by the way, showing how politics can mislead you or try to mislead you. When they put in the income tax in the late 70s, the legislation was not entitled, new income tax. It was entitled the Property Tax Relief Act. Going to get an income tax to relieve property taxes. Yes, not. We have the worst, almost the worst. Not as bad as California on the income tax, but we're trying. We're getting a new governor who's going to try to catch up to you, and we don't have the valley to overcome some of that. And the property tax side, I think we're just about the worst in the country.
Well, on a positive note, this question starts out first. Congratulations on 100 years of publishing Forbes.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the question is, what's your opinion on professionally managed brokerage accounts for those who are not do-it-yourselfers? Do the 1% fees and higher really eat into all of the gains over the long run? This goes back to Warren Buffett versus the mutual funds, index funds.
Right. First on the 100th, yes, we did in September celebrate our 100th anniversary. As I think I was telling you earlier, I had explained to, and I had my 70th birthday this year, and so I had explained to my young grandson, the magazine was 100, not me. And,
Thank you.
And the thing is, to youngsters, whether you're 50 or 150, we all look the same. You've got to get used to that. But to answer the question on the fees, in terms of if you don't have the knack and want to spend the time babysitting your money, it's good to get professional advice, whether through funds or account or whatever. But the thing is, and that question hits it, is what are the fees? And this is where you'll see ads on TV from Ken Fisher, who used to live in this state, now lives in the state of Washington, where the income tax is 0. Not a coincidence. But anyway, about annuities. Annuities are a great idea, but most of them have embedded fees and fees that really are nasty. So you got to see, what am I getting for the money? That's why I suggest that on your retirement money, and I'm not new in this, Burton Malkiel, Buffett, Jack Bogle, and others say you go the indexing route. You have a couple of index funds, a big one, small cap, so you have a little variety, but you in essence have very, very low fees, because over time those things add up. Those things accumulate. So you ride the market generally, but on your own particular situation side, you have to make the determination. What am I getting in value? I may be the kind of person who needs reassurance or explanations that I can't get from reading some proxy that is written in a way that makes sure you don't understand it, and things like that. And so you'd say, I'm getting something for my money. This works for me. This works for me. You have to make that decision. Now, one of the things no financial planner will tell you to do is buy what we used to call whole life or permanent insurance. I like it because even if you get a sound company, even if times are bad, you know what they call cash value is going up. So it's not hitting balls out of the park and landing them in the bay, but you have that there. So you have to see and be honest with yourself in terms of what you have an appetite for. I know a lot of people who will go with a traditional brokerage. The fees have come down over the years because of the pressure of index funds, but the key thing is it meets their particular needs. Whereas if they're on their own, they might be whipsawed one way or the other by emotions. So you have to have a trusted advisor. In that case, a little bit of a fee is worthwhile, but you have to make that decision. But do have some index funds, and even look at whole life. I know there'll be howls from every financial planner, but get it young enough. Or even they now have policies where you can in effect pay them up front depending on your estate plans and all that. Anyway, complicated world, but having advice that can meet your particular needs, family needs, not a bad thing.
Thank you. This is a two-part question on income taxes. Part A, how would the tax plan you are suggesting impact a retiree with a $60,000 annual income? And the second part is, how can flat tax possibly avoid increasing the burden on lower income people?
Ask the answer, first part of your question on the 60,000 would be virtually zero. You shouldn't have to pay income tax on your Social Security because when you're working, that tax is paid off the top. Take 50,000 just as an example. The 7.65, which is partially Medicare, mostly Social Security, comes right off the top, $3,800. And you still pay income tax on the $3,800. You never got it, but you're still paying income tax on it. So your Social Security receipt should be free. Especially since they took it without your permission. That was the condition of working. Then on the other part of your income, it would be very, very low in taxes, depending on if you're married or that kind of thing. It would be far lower, I think, than what you're paying today. This is federal level. I'm not talking about state. That's another matter. On the second part of the question, on lower income people, that's why you have these generous exemptions. Like that family of four, $52,800, you don't pay federal income tax, and it works. So for low income people, it's great because you're not hit with taxes from the beginning, and if you start making reforms on how we do the payroll taxes, so you don't get slammed so much with the payroll tax, you can actually move more rapidly up the ladder. And this will be controversial, but I'll say it anyway since I'm not running for anything. Ask yourselves why in times past one income could support a family, and today two incomes barely make it happen. I think part of it is not only the unsound money, but also the huge tax burden that you pay today versus years ago, which gives you less choice. And so if you like choices, then I think a simplified system that it's very hard, conclude on this, it's very hard for a salaried person working to accumulate real capital. Unless you're lucky, you bought Facebook or something, unless you're lucky, it's very hard to get it. And the stupid, I shouldn't bash my own party, but if the Republicans tomorrow do what they looks like they may do, it's going to be even hard with the 401ks and IRAs. Fox had some calculations, obviously depends on your own particular circumstance, but over a working life, under the current system, you'd probably accumulate normal salary $790,000. With what looks like the Republicans may propose tomorrow, you'd be down to $590,000. That's huge in retirement. So the deck is stacked against those who are working. It shouldn't be that way. It hasn't always been that way, and we should try to get it so you can accumulate real capital. And by the way, don't try to accumulate real capital by going to cocktail parties. One of the worst things is, especially when the market's doing well, you go to a cocktail party and you listen to your neighbor, how well he's done. You know the guy's a dope, and you figure, if that guy can do it, why can't I? Or you listen to your brother-in-law, and you know he's a jerk, and he seems to be... Psychologists will tell you that we're wired in a way where losses are so much more painful than the pleasures of gain. So you talk about your gains, even when it's a loss, you minimize it in terms of conversation, but admitting to a huge, it just psychologically rips us out. Daniel Kahneman and others have demonstrated this. So don't listen to the cocktail chatter, that's all it is, and you don't have to do it. Don't. You'll be much better off.
Thank you. Bernie Sanders says effective corporate tax rate is 14%. Is that accurate?
I've heard it's more like 22, but anyway, what it underscores is why we need real tax simplicity. Because instead of having a 35% rate, And then you have to go through all these contortions to try to get it down, wasting all that brain power and time and money. Just knock it down to 17, and so you don't have to go through all of that, and you can go about doing more productive things like coming up with new products and services. And I shouldn't say this, but I will. One who's been a master at this has been General Electric. But look at where they are today. You know, maybe if they'd been focusing more on running their business, I shouldn't say that, it's always easy to knock somebody who's down, but anyway, I want that brain power focused on productive things. So what he's in effect saying, let's make the rate higher, I say, let's make it simpler, and you collect more. Every country has found that when you make things simple, you get first, ultimately more prosperity because people are focused on real things, and also you collect more because it's just not, unless you're really perverse, not worth it to get around something that's low. You got other things on your mind than traversing the traps of the tax code.
Thank you. How can we make bipartisanship cool again?
Well, you have to have two sides willing to do it, and problem is now there's no trust. Now that will change. Back in the 80s, and by the way, everyone, they talk about Ronald Reagan, who was president, and a fellow named Tip O'Neill, who was Democrat Speaker of the House. The two didn't like each other. They kind of disdained each other. O'Neill thought Reagan was a dope. Reagan thought O'Neill was just an inebriated hack. But they did sit down in '86, and others did too, and came up with a great tax bill. Now, the reason they came up with a great tax bill is that Reagan cut taxes. He had some increases, mostly big tax cuts in his first term. In 1984, before any of you were born, they had a presidential election, pandering again, but they had a presidential election, and the Democrat candidate was Walter Mondale, who led off right here in this city, San Francisco, where they had the convention, and said, I'm going to raise your taxes. I said, oh, thank you, Walter, when I heard that. And Reagan, you know, being the tax cutter, ran against that. Reagan won 49 out of 50 states. So the Democrats realized people like lower taxes. So how did they get together? Well, Democrats hated all these tax shelters. The tax code then was littered with tax shelters from the 50s, 60s, 70s. You know, avocado tax shelter, llama tax shelter, all this stuff in there. Republicans wanted lower tax rates. And they discovered when they sat down that you just can't touch this shelter and that shelter, either get rid of all of them or none of them. So they swept most of them away, just cleaned the code of those tax shelters. And they drastically cut tax rates, reduced the number of brackets down to 2. And the top rate, income tax rate, went from 50 down to 28%. They got rid of all these tax shelters, and the bill passed the Senate 97-3. Because everyone got something big from it. The Democrats got the shelters on the chopping block, Republicans got the lower tax rates, so everyone came away happy. You have to have that kind of mood. Maybe we need another election or two before they sit down and say, okay, here's where we got to go. And so it'll happen again. It always does. These things don't last forever, just as like teenagers don't last forever. We have 5 daughters, so you know, you get through these things.
Unfortunately, we've reached the point in our program where there is time for only one last question. Next week in your state of New Jersey is a gubernatorial election. Any comment, and would you reveal who you're supporting?
Well, I'm supporting the Republican, Gondano, and the Democrat, sadly, came out of, he's a fellow named Murphy, is a big tax increaser. He wants to substantially increase taxes. He doesn't want California to feel lonely with a crazy tax code. So he wants to do that. He wants to increase other taxes, massively increase spending, and just wreck the state. The reason the Republican is having a hard time is that we have an incumbent governor called Chris Christie, who has managed to drive his popularity down to levels lower than any other governor in the country. Lowest in New Jersey history. And the reason, one of the reasons, many reasons he finds himself there is that earlier this year he tried to do a raid on the local insurance company, health company, raid their reserves several $100 million, just take a company and scoop out the money. I don't know whether that was constitutional, but he wanted to do it. And then he even decided to have a budget crisis. So the state, long story short, when he's trying to do these raids, perhaps illegal raids, he shut the government down over the 4th of July weekend, which meant that the beaches weren't open. Got people very mad. But he went on a state-owned beach and was photographed sitting on a chair, lolling in the sun, and having a grand time when everyone else couldn't get to the beaches in the Jersey Shore. And boy, you go online, you'll find some choice pictures and comments on that one. So she's kind of stuck with that, and so she's going to have a hard time. So next 4 years, New Jersey's going to have a pretty tough time. You know, I've never thought California, from a tax point of view, would be attractive, but by the time this guy gets through, may be the case.
Our thanks to Steve Forbes, Chairman and Editor-in-Chief of Forbes Media, as well as the author of the book, Reviving America. We also thank everyone here for attending today, as well as our audience on radio, television, and the internet. A reminder to our audience here that Mr. Forbes will sign book plates, since we have a late delivery on the books, outside this room following the program, and then we will forward to you your book upon receipt here at the club. Thank you very much for joining us, and Steve, thank you for being so candid.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.